David, I was talking about Social Security, and clearly Musk is advertising that and entitlement programs, as he calls them. He's advertising that as something that he wants to go after with the same hatchet that he's used on other government agencies.
Yeah, well, I think that's always been the plan here. And Russell Vogt is quite right. You don't lead with that. Steve Bannon has warned that taking away Medicaid, taking away the lower rungs of Obamacare would be a big mistake because they benefit red states overwhelmingly compared to blue states. But that's always been the plan here. And I think there's another large aspect of the plan that hasn't gotten enough attention. Musk is shutting down an FAA, mostly in-house project to modernize and update and revise aviation maps. And if you've ever seen an aviation map, what pilots carry in those bags that they carry on and off the plane, boy, they are really complicated to look at. They require a great deal of knowledge of what you're seeing to make sense of them. He wants that to be turned over to one of his companies. Now, in the past, we would have just called this flat out corruption, but we have been immunized to that by the way issues have developed and been presented in the news now for some time. But, they can't run the IRS with half the people it has, but they could hire private corporations to replace the IRS. They can't run Social Security, which they would like to get rid of once, especially they have messed up the entire payment system. But, oh, wait a minute, we have to hire private companies. And the general history of replacing government ownership with private ownership is higher costs. I've written about this at length. There have been a number of studies that have shown this. And if you think about it for a minute, for example, you have a municipal water system. This happened to people in the town of Felton, just outside Santa Cruz, where I grew up. If you replace a municipal water system with a private water system, they have to earn enough profit to pay taxes on their profits, and they have to earn a rate of return. Whereas the rate of return government needs is much smaller. They need enough to be able to update and replace the system as they go along and build up reserves. So inherently, unless it's badly managed, nonprofit utility should be more effective and efficient. And in the area of electricity, it's incredibly so. Nonprofit juice typically costs 15 to 30% less than for-profit juice. That is investor-owned or IOU utilities compared to municipal or cooperative utilities. And I think this is part of the scheme. It's to extract more money out of the government. It's so much easier, Mark, to make money by changing the government rule book than by winning in the competitive marketplace. That naturally people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, who really don't know how to make money, but know how to mine the treasury, gravitate in that direction.
So this is a really great point because it speaks to the architecture of what they're doing. And we've talked for years, literally, on this show about the privatization and how that's always the game. But now it's being pursued more aggressively and more quickly, I think, than we've ever seen, at least in my lifetime.
Well, if Social Security suddenly can't make payments, as the former commissioner just said he thinks will start happening within 90 days, maybe as little as 30, you can tell the headline and the announcement that's coming. Well, the government couldn't do this. That's why we need the private sector to step in. Never mind that we're the ones who throw sand in the gears.
Right. That's exactly it. I mean, it's that simple. It's there's no sleight of hand here. Break it, and then bring in a private company to, quote, fix it, that which was not broken.
And at the same time, don't fill out your government-required Office of Government Ethics forms. And if you do fill them out, don't have any staff to investigate you, and make sure that your person is the Attorney General so that if you lied through your teeth, if you did file, nothing will happen to you.
In this environment, and I'm just seeing it through the chat, and we see it day after day, what to do, how can we push back, Democrats are doing nothing, etc. What would be in your playbook for making noise sufficient to maybe get through the rest of the noise?
Well, I think for the moment right now, you have to let Trump be Trump, LTBT. they'll screw up on their own, but they need to screw up enough that ordinary people pay a price for it. So he's abandoned his promise that he would immediately lower grocery prices and eggs would be cheaper. He is taking other steps that are completely in line with Project 2025, which he insisted he knew nothing about, or on other days of the week. Well, there are parts of it I like and parts of it I don't like, because he can't keep his lies straight. And for a while, they need to sort of do their thing. I think the Democrats need to make a record. I thought it was terrific that the junior senator from Oregon, Merkley, asked two Trump witnesses, is Donald Trump a Russian asset? Now, if Donald Trump is a Russian agent is an arguable point, but is he an asset to the Russian? Of course, he's an asset to the Russian government. I don't think that's disputable at this point. He spews Russian propaganda and he's taken Russia's side against Ukraine. That makes him, as a matter of indisputable fact, a Russian asset. I looked this morning in my New York Times and online at the Washington Post and Reuters and AP and all of these other news services I pay to get. Can't find a word about that from Senator Merkley's questions. So right in front of the eyes of Washington reporters, you have the question asked, and they don't cover it. This is the big part of the problem we have is the Washington Press Corps is operating under the historic rules of Washington, which had their pluses and their minuses. The ball game has changed and they're not evolving. And what happens if you don't evolve, whether you're a bird or a news organization, is eventually you evolve yourself out of existence.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you put it that way, because you're right. I mean, I just was seeing something, Oliver Darcy, I read his Substack, and there is a piece that he did about how the White House press corps is putting together, this coalition, and they're going to petition the White House about the way the media is being, there it is, U.S. Senator asks nominees if President Trump is a Russian asset. Yeah, it's that's in the London Economic. So again, it's not a mainstream mainstream publication that would then be picked up by MS, CNN, et cetera. But I thought that Darcy's note about what was happening with the White House press corps sort of dovetails with what you're saying, which is, hey, guy, they don't care about your coalition of journalists petitioning the White House. They don't care.
Right.
And they know that there's nothing you can do. It is their media machine now.
Right. And so what that means is that I think more journalists need to adopt what we did at DC Report, which we ran when I was publisher on a shoestring. I think our average for the 7 years I ran it was $3,000 a month of revenue. I mean, just nothing. And we focused on the public record. What was in the Federal Register? That's published every day by the U.S. government. It's proposals to change rules and public comments on those rules. What was in pieces of legislation or budgets? And there's too much Washington coverage that consists of, well, this is what my sources told me. Every day I read stories in the Wall Street Journal, even on finance, where I say to myself, this is a very readable story. The writer of the story has done a nice job of collecting quotes, and it's very clear the writer doesn't have a clue to what's going on at the level of principle and theory. It's all mechanical. If you want to get at this, you've got to get away from this mechanical racehorse, who's ahead in the bureaucracy business, and look at what is happening in the workings of the government. And the idea that nobody wants to read this, the answer to that is, well, then learn how to write it in a way that people are interested in. It was an old saying, a million deaths is a tragedy, but one death will cause people to cry and open their wallets. And so find examples of these things. Now, there's a very good story leading the New York Times this morning by the fellow who has my old job covering the IRS. And it's about how they want to eliminate half of the IRS. And there's a 64-year-old woman who had spent her career working for multinational companies and helping them, manipulate the tax code to their advantage. So now she's gone to work for the government to uncover this, and she finds a company with an international company typically makes $3 billion a year in profits. They've never been audited. So there's probably abundant opportunities to find revenue there. So what happened? Well, she and a lot of other people were thrown out the door because they don't want to find that. They want to tax the people listening to this show, but they don't want to tax themselves. They don't want to tax big companies. And controlling the IRS, they can do that. And they can do it in ways you can never tell because we have a law called 6103 that makes your tax returns secret. By the way, tax returns 101 years ago, in 1924, so the stories came out right now, 100 years ago, they were public record. I have all these front pages from the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, elsewhere. You know, the lead story on the front page will say things like John D. Rockefeller Jr. went to the Internal Revenue Service yesterday. It was called the Internal Revenue Bureau then, to file his tax return, and it showed an income of, gazillions of dollars, and he paid X less gazillion in taxes. And interestingly, he paid like 10 times what his father paid because his income was so much bigger. The original John D. Rockefeller.
Right.
I actually think there's no reason not to go back to making tax returns public, because the people who are in the digital businesses, Google and all of those related companies, they know how much you make. I live in a neighborhood where I know that houses sell for somewhere between $400,000 and $700,000. And you can adjust for the fact that housing is, Rochester, New York's a lot cheaper. They would be $5 million houses on the west side of LA.
Sure.
But we know what the total income is in the zip code I live in. We know how much of it is labor and how much of it's capital. So you can figure out the average. And, this shouldn't be shocking anymore. My salary at DC Report was public. It was minimal, and it wasn't revealed only because we didn't have $50,000 to pay me. It took a few $1,000s. You had to have $50,000, I think, for them to reveal it. But my wife's salary's been public for almost our entire marriage. The school teachers, police officers, firefighters, their salaries, their pensions, those are all public.
That's interesting, David.
We'd have less tax cheating.
That's such a clever take on it. And the only reason I would, pause on it is because the vigilantism that sort of informed the politics of today, the way that people have been empowered and even encouraged to kind of, go after either by doxing or, as I say, just old-fashioned vigilante posses coming after people. I feel like too much information out there now. I view it as a real liability.
So let me address that and suggest a slight change to that. All right.
Okay.
First of all, we should get serious about doxing people. And, it's like all those spam phone calls you get. The electronic industries go, oh, there's no way we can track these phone calls. Really? Think all the things you can do, you can't do it? No, you're not motivated to do it because there's no profit or government requirement in it. If you were told you have to do this or be fined $1,000 a phone call, they'd solve it incredibly fast. We could then say, well, you're not going to release your exact income, but we'll put out your category. So you're in the $100,000 to $125,000 group. You're in the $200,000 to $250,000 group. And here is the share of your gross income that you paid in income taxes. So your effective tax rate was, 10 cents on the dollar, 28 cents on the dollar, whatever it is. And then you would notice things like one of the first times an IRS agent was telling me sort of out of school, he was training a young person. They went to a restaurant, a coffee shop sort of place in Wall Street, and the company showed, almost no profit, which is typical, a modest salary. And as they're leaving from their last visit, a Bentley or Rolls Royce, I don't remember which, convertible pulls up, and a woman falling out of the top of her dress with a mink coat steps out, walks in the door of the restaurant, plants a big kiss on the owner. So they take the license plate down, and they discover the guy actually lives in a mansion out in Long Island that he couldn't live on and the income involved. Congress has prohibited that kind of audit. You are no longer allowed to do it. If somebody who says, I only make $25,000 a year as he walks onto his Gulfstream jet, the IRS is not allowed to investigate you. That is institutional corruption, and our government is full of institutional corruption, and we need to go after that. And if we survive Donald Trump and his others' efforts to become dictatorial, that I think is one of the first things we need to do. We need to scour the government for institutional corruption. which the founders were very worried about. And if you want to learn about it, Zephyr Teachout, a professor at Fordham Law, has an excellent book called Corruption in America. And if you care about this, it'll grab you right away. It's written to be understood by ordinary folks. You don't have to be a lawyer or a policy wonk. Corruption in America by Zephyr Teachout. It's like,
I'm
the
just noting it
paperback's
now.
like $10.
Yeah, Corruption in America. Got it. David, I'm going to get to Ukraine in a moment. So those who are, there's some messages in the chat. I very much want to talk to David about Ukraine. He cares very much about it and knows a lot about it, and we'll get to it in a second. But I don't want to, before we completely leave government, I just want to kind of tie up what's happening. I saw that there'll be a bunch of people let go from the CIA. I see a lot of people the intelligence community is being purged in many ways. This billionaire boys cabinet, they all seem to have a view of the future that involves the privatization of government and flushing all of these government workers. As we look at this playing field, I'm wondering what you prioritize. I mean, obviously, as we've said and kind of stipulated to, there's a privatization that's the end goal. In the meantime, the damage seems to be reaching kind of a critical mass when people don't get their Social Security checks, et cetera. I wonder if you can speak to this.
Well, the things they're doing, like messing with Social Security's software code, especially the source code, that will blow up in their faces sooner or later, but I think they intend it to. I mean, I think that's part of the purpose. And I won't be surprised if Elon Musk down the road, or somebody else around Trump, not Trump himself, says, well, it's a good thing that these systems don't work because we just can't afford this. We can't afford it. We've got to stop it. And they don't care that people who are old will be evicted or go hungry or die of starvation. And they've told us that because they don't care about the people overseas who were having their viral diseases, of which AIDS is only one, suppressed because of the medications we sent. I think that the greatest priority and concern should be what they're doing to national security. They're getting rid of experienced FBI counterintelligence agents, and that's the counterintelligence is the FBI's job by and large. The CIA, get the James Bond movie nonsense out of your head. The CIA is mostly an analytical organization. And by getting rid of people who aren't white, straight males like you and me, they are endangering our national security. If you want to know what's going on in Iran, for example, you need to have people who are native speakers of Pushtan and other languages, Farsi, etc. And we don't have those people. The whole attack on DEI is not just white supremacy, it's literally putting us in danger because of that. And I have a little suggestion I've been saving for your show here.
Okay.
We can't say DEI, right? I mean, they are so determined. They removed the pictures of the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima because the pilot, Paul Tibbets, named it for his mother, Enola Gay. That's how ridiculous this is. They're banning the word woman. So DEI, you'll get in trouble for it. Okay, fine. Let's come up with some new language. How about bold, deep, and eclectic? Bold, deep, and eclectic. Let's go around the corner about this. And every university in this country, there's lots of traffic going on about this among the professoriate and others. They all recognize that the Trump administration is going to come after them at some point. They just cut $400 million from Columbia over its alleged anti-Semitism. And I was there when one of the demonstrations was taking place. I was speaking to a UN conference that was held at Columbia. And this was not the kind of demonstration I covered in the late 60s and early 70s in America on campuses like Stanford and San Francisco State. But it was not materially different than lots of student protests. And Donald wants to shut down protests. You shouldn't be allowed, he says, to write things about me I don't approve of. Well, the same thing applies to protests. He considers them illegitimate. All dictators consider protests illegitimate. And people need to wake up. Donald is our de facto dictator. He's just consolidating power, and he's still working on it.
And so I think you've heard David offer some solutions. Some of them do involve independent media getting some of the word out about this. I mean, the dictatorial nature of what's happening. I mean, that all needs to be, I think, reported in even more aggressive ways. To Ukraine, there comes this. Phineas says, please ask David K. Johnston about Musk giving the GPS coordinates of the Ukraine Starlink transponders to Russia and Putin.
Well, several years ago, after the war began in 2022, Musk cut off Ukrainian access to Starlink. We're clearly operating as Putin's helper here against the Ukrainian people. And we're not in a state of war, so you can't be a traitor, but it is treasonous behavior that you're seeing by Donald Trump and Elon Musk. We're changing the whole world's orientation right now from America, champion of liberty and justice for all of our flaws, to America, champion of tyrants and suppression of freedom, and supporting murderous dictators. And that will have very serious long-term consequences. Even if somehow tomorrow we swept away Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, the impact of this, the recognition that the United States of America can be run by unprincipled, incompetent, and dishonest people, that's never going away. Never. 500 years from now, it will be with us no matter how the world is. And so I think this is an extraordinarily serious matter. Hopefully the Europeans are going to step up. They don't have sufficient militaries to do all that we were doing. We have the fanciest toys. But the Ukrainians have proven so resilient, and their tactics have proven so smart, like these drones they're building from off-the-shelf equipment to drop bombs and see soldiers. There's new video out in the last 2 days of Russian soldiers who, when they're captured, they tell the Ukrainians that Ukrainians don't have to threaten to torture them or anything. They tell them right off, well, you know, they grabbed me off the street. They forced me into the army. They said, here's a gun. They showed me how to load the gun and how to point and shoot it. And then they put me in the front. Surprise, surprise, those guys die like flies when they get to the front. And there are scenes of Russian armored vehicles when they realize the Ukrainians are onto them, turning around and rushing back into the trees. Because when they're out in the open, they can be hit with the drone bombs. Of soldiers dropping their weapons and throwing their arms up. The war is going very badly for Putin, and this is exactly the moment when Putin needs Donald Trump to help him, because otherwise he's just not getting there. And of course, by lifting the sanctions, now he can get access to things. The Europeans can seize all the Russian money that's in European banks. It's something like $300 billion. Give it to the Ukrainians. They may have to go to the black market, but they can get lots of weaponry if they have that kind of money. That's one step.
And that's being openly spoken about by the French, French president. Yeah.
Yes. I do TV in India all the time. They have a CNN equivalent there. And I'm on there sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. But they have been getting super cheap oil from Russia. They've been able to buy it for about $48 a barrel. The world price in recent months has been a little over 80. Well, if you lift the sanctions, they're going to spend more for that oil. That's not good for their economy. And unfortunately, it helps Putin. So keeping the sanctions on about oil, even if America drops out, the Europeans can do a lot about that. So Europe's resolve is important. I spent 2 hours today being interviewed for Baltic State Television, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. And I said, you know, I expect if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, he'll need a year or 2 to rebuild his military, which has been much more than decimated. It's been 90%ed almost. But his tanks are going to roll into your country. And the host, who was a very smart guy, an ethnic Russian, said, oh, yeah, no, that's what's going to happen next. Because they're small and they can be captured very easily. And there is a large ethnic Russian population in all 3 countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So there's long-term consequences. We need to think not about today and tomorrow and a month from now. We need to be thinking about what life will be like 5 years from now, 25 years from now, 50 years from now, if we don't get a handle on this. And it seems that the Europeans, particularly the Danes, the Germans, the French, the British, and the Poles, they get this.
I also think that what you're noting, the things that the United States used to stand for, democracy, freedom, pushback against authoritarianism, that's clearly all changed. And I just don't know when you get that back. But to your point, front page of the New York Times today, I'm looking at it, Russian forces appear stalled and exhausted is the headline. I mean, you have Trump running to their rescue at the time in this conflict where they're really teetering. The Russian army is teetering. I get it. Both sides are carved up. But the idea somehow that the Russians are dominating, which was the rap that they were giving Zelensky, you guys are done. You know, they're gonna crush you anyway. Let's get to a peace. That's just not really a reflection of the reality.
No, and Donald has literally spoken almost word for word Kremlin propaganda, you know, that you started the war, Ukraine, etc. And the argument that, well, Ukraine wanted to join NATO, therefore they had to be invaded. You know, that's like, gee, my wife didn't close the door to the refrigerator, therefore I need to kill her for ruining the food in the refrigerator. I mean, it's so ridiculously out of proportion. Putin is very vulnerable right now. And, you know, Joe Biden made a major error here. And we need to own that and make it clear. Biden was deeply steeped in international relations. He chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for years. He bravely went and confronted Milosevic during the Bosnia schizophrenia war and could have been killed, and told him, you know, knock off these genocidal activities where they were killing whole villages, or you're going to die in a prison in the Netherlands, which is what happened in the end. He went to a prison in the Netherlands. But Biden gave out intelligence information, which I've never seen happen before in the history of the country. Information they felt wasn't compromising because we gathered it from things like the Russians don't have encrypted communications, or to the degree they do, they're useless, and showed that they were preparing to invade in about 5 or 6 months, as they did, Ukraine. What he should have done then wasn't this little incremental stuff he kept doing and ratcheting up. He should have said, we are immediately going to ship a gigantic amount of weaponry to Ukraine. I am sending over our very best field advisors. We will provide everything that is needed to repel this invasion, except American soldiers firing weapons. And had he done that, had he said, and by the way, we're bringing Ukrainian pilots to America to learn how to fight F-16s. We're going to give them 100 of them. And those things cost over $100 million each. Somebody can look up the number, but it's enormous.
Right.
If they had done all of that in the beginning, Putin wouldn't have gotten anywhere. He has a Potemkin army. He's down to having donkey carts bringing food and supplies to the front. So if the Europeans really step up right now, if they can develop the resolve to do that, I think that Putin will be pushed back, but they got to really step up. And if you're thinking I'm a warmonger, please believe I'm not. It's the last thing I want. My view is that there are wars that people should put their life on the line for. I'm the son of a 100% disabled veteran of World War II, whom I watched die every day I was growing up until I was 20, and he couldn't carry on anymore. And the standard I've always had is, am I willing to die for this war? As a father, am I willing to give up one of my 3 sons for this war? As a grandfather, am I willing to give up one of my 5 grandsons? And if I'm not, then no. We don't need to fight the Russians in this war. The Europeans don't need to fight it. The Ukrainians can do it, but they have to have the weaponry and, most importantly, the electronic communications and intelligence. And that's where the conduct of Elon Musk is just beyond the pale and establishes beyond any doubt that he is an enemy of freedom and democracy. He is, like his maternal grandparents, if not literally, at least in mindset, a Nazi.
I was just talking to someone today who said that the Musks of the administration, of which there are many, the billionaire boys cabinet and the crew, including Trump, have to be called out as Nazis, and because that is the word that has to get out there. I mean, because this is that. So it's interesting that you chose that word.
Well, I always want us to be hesitant about these things, but keep in mind that when he changed Twitter to X, the ASCII symbol for X is H, and it's understood by American neo-Nazis to be a subterfuge to say Nazi. We saw him do the
Nazi salutes. I mean, he's
yes,
doing the Nazi salutes like you and I are shaking hands.
And when the White House and others say, oh, that's nonsense, that's not what he did. Gee, how come on the right they're saying that and Musk hasn't protested that, oh, no, that's completely wrong. It was something else. And even if you want to argue it was a Praetorian salute from ancient Rome, that's not any better. That doesn't improve the situation. So what people shouldn't do, Mark, is give up heart. Okay? You know, we survived the invasion of 1812 by the British and the White House being burned. We survived the Civil War. We can survive this. That doesn't mean we will. You know, we didn't have to win World War II. And you want to see an alternative history of that, you know, there's the novel by the late Philip Roth about if the Nazis had won, and then there's that TV series, The Man in the High Castle.
Sure.
And those will give you good examples of what could have happened. So people need to be brave and they need to be resolute. They need to be supporting candidates so that this next Congress, we get a majority in the House and hopefully in the Senate. And they need to be standing up for the values that make America what it is. Our country is an idea and an ideal, and we haven't reached the ideal and probably never will because the goalposts will move as we get better. But, you know, saying we're going to be all white supremacy, that only white men should be getting benefits and they should run the government, and stopping cancer research in progress. There's a cartoon I put up on my Facebook and B-Sky pages of Trump with his little hat on saying, here's this child who has cancer and look what we're doing to save his life. And then it's a little child who says, I'm on cancer medications. Please don't stop my research. And in foul language, it tells him to F himself.
No, that's exactly what when he used that little kid as a prop, I thought, yeah, the other side of that, I discussed it on the show, is that the programs to address that cancer and others, they're completely being undermined and stopped. We're witnessing what would have happened had Lindbergh been president during World War II. Yeah. That's a really good comparison to
That's a very good comparison, and that's the point of Philip Roth's novel. That you know, and Roth among his generation, Updike and the other John Irving and others, he was unusual among them in that the older he got, the better his novels got. He didn't rest on his laurels. He didn't get flabby. He got better and better.
This is the very last question for you because we got to let you go. Michael D says, please ask David, why is Trump on Putin's leash? Why is Trump on Putin's leash? Compromised, love for dictators, or is it business opportunities in Russia and Russia carries Trump's debt or other?
Well, all of those are true. The Russians have been courting Donald as a government since 1987 and Russians as folks since at least 1983. Do I think they have compromising material on him? Yeah. I mean, I don't know that the P-tape story has any truth to it whatsoever, but Donald's behavior, there's lots of things like, you know, how many Americans know, as I do, that Donald was partners for years with one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in America, and it's all in the public record, but, you know, it's never made the mainstream news except for one passing line in the New York Times that was kind of obscure. Donald, of course, believes in dictatorial actions. Donald really does believe, and I came to this conclusion long ago, that he is the only person who can or should be president because everyone else is an idiot, because that's how he thinks. As Eric said in 2008, the second son, we're getting all the financing we need out of Russia. And we know from the Reuters investigation of who bought apartments from Trump that Russians paid super premium prices for Trump apartments all over the place. So I think they found 135 examples of above market sales. And on the debt issue, why is Donald Trump allowed Musk to upstage him as he did in the White House with the 4-year-old child? Well, Donald owes about $600 million in the 2 New York civil suits, the E. Jean Carroll defamation case and the fraud case. And he doesn't have, as best we know, $600 million. Of course, he hasn't filed his required ethics statement and financial disclosure, so we don't know anything. But I don't have any reason to think he's got that kind of money. One has to wonder, is he somehow directly or indirectly in hawk to Elon Musk? The insurance company that put up the bond We don't know there isn't a back-to-back transaction there where they put up the bond because Elon Musk guaranteed it through some other mechanism.
I see.
And so long as the Republicans control Congress, we have no chance of finding out the truth about that. Whether that could be, I'm speculating here, let me be clear, but Donald Trump doesn't let other people outshine him, but he does it with Musk and he does it with Putin. And that suggests to me, from my knowing him for almost 37 years, there's something we're not seeing that if we saw it would instantly say, oh, okay, that makes sense. So,
well,
anyway.
It is, yeah. I mean, it is the source of speculation, I think, at this point, but the picture is a grim one. I love our visits, and I love that you actually today, in all of this, have given us a little bit of hope. Canada has a larger GDP than Russia, yet Trump treats Russia like an economic superpower, says depressed Canadian. Yeah.
I may have said this last week. If not, people should know this because it's kind of funny. You know, Trump's executive orders are full of typos and misspellings and bad grammar. And I've yet to see a story pointing that out because I've never seen a presidential document in my life that wasn't letter perfect. Trump imposed an extra 10% tariff on energy from Canada. So if they send crude oil or natural gas across the border, gasoline, coal, there's an extra 10% tariff, except for one source of electricity that drives Donald crazy, and that's wind turbine electricity. It's not in the list. So even though it's somewhere between 1% and 3%, depending on where you are at the border, of the electricity that we buy from Canada, the wind turbines that supposedly cause cancer, kill whales, kill birds, it's not in. And that's a good example of how they don't really know what they're doing. They're a bunch of ideologues. They're not managers. They're not executives. So see you next week.
Yeah, thank you, David K. Johnston. Thanks, David.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.